AITA for not attending my sister's wedding because of her child-free rule. My sister recently got married, and it was a truly massive event. She had spent the better part of a year meticulously planning every single detail. It was the kind of wedding you might see in a magazine, elegant, extravagant, and with an incredibly detailed vision that she was determined to bring to life. One of her non-negotiable rules was that the wedding would be entirely child-free. I respected that completely because, at the end of the day, it was her wedding, her big day, and her choice to make. But here's the thing, I'm a single dad to an amazing 6-year-old boy. His mom has not been in the picture for years, and I don't have much of a support system to fall back on. My life revolves around my son, and I've gotten pretty good at juggling the demands of single parenthood, my job, and my personal life. That said, when the wedding invitation arrived, I knew it was going to be a challenge. I was genuinely excited to celebrate with my sister. Despite our occasional sibling squabbles, we've always been close, and I was really proud of her. I wanted to be there for her on one of the biggest days of her life. But as soon as I saw the child-free note on the invite, my heart sank a little. I knew this was going to be complicated. I reached out to my sister pretty early on, months before the wedding, to explain my situation. I told her that I really wanted to be there, but because of my responsibilities as a single parent, it would be tough to make it work. I asked if there was any flexibility with the child-free rule, just for my son, or if there was some kind of compromise we could come up with. I wasn't trying to ruin her vision or be difficult, but I was genuinely stuck. Her response was immediate and firm, absolutely no exceptions. She said she wanted a child-free wedding for a reason and that making one exception would open the floodgates for others to demand the same. I get it, I really do. It's her wedding, and she's entitled to set her rules. But that left me with a problem. Without any family members available to help, I would need to hire a babysitter for the entire day, and since the wedding was out of town, it would have to be someone who could come with me and stay overnight in a hotel with my son. I thought this was a reasonable compromise. I wasn't asking for my son to attend the ceremony or reception, I just needed someone I trusted to be nearby while I was at the event. But when I ran this idea past my sister, she shot it down. She said that even having my son in the same hotel violated the spirit of her child-free wedding and that I needed to figure it out like everyone else. I was pretty taken aback by her reaction. I wasn't trying to be difficult, but as a single dad with limited resources, my options were pretty slim. I asked if she'd be willing to help cover the cost of a sitter since attending her wedding would already require travel, a hotel, and taking time off work. She flat out refused, saying it wasn't her responsibility and that if I couldn't handle it, maybe I shouldn't come. That stung. But I still tried. I spent weeks looking for someone who could watch my son. I asked friends, coworkers, neighbors, anyone I could think of, but no one was available for an overnight gig. I even tried contacting professional babysitting services, but the logistics and cost made it almost impossible to pull off. When the date got closer and I still hadn't found a solution, I finally had to tell my sister that I wouldn't be able to attend. I let her know how sorry I was and how much I wished I could be there, but I couldn't leave my son alone or with someone I didn't trust just to make it work. Her reaction was explosive. She called me selfish and accused me of not caring about her big day. She said that everyone else with kids had managed to figure it out and that I was just making excuses. I tried to explain that my situation was different, but she wasn't hearing it. She said I was prioritizing my son over her, which, to be fair, I was, but I didn't think that was unreasonable. The wedding came and went, and I stayed home with my son. I felt guilty and sad about missing such an important day, but I knew I had made the right choice for my family. Unfortunately, my absence has caused a massive rift in my family. My sister still isn't speaking to me, and my parents have been blowing up my phone, saying I should have tried harder or found a way to make it work. They keep telling me that my sister is deeply hurt and that I should apologize for letting her down. Other relatives have chimed in as well, saying I was wrong to miss such a monumental event. I don't know what else I could have done. I tried everything I could think of to make it work, but my hands were tied. I love my sister, and I wanted to be there for her, but I wasn't willing to compromise my son's safety or well-being. Now I'm being painted as the bad guy, and I honestly don't know if I'm in the wrong. So, am I the asshole for missing my sister's wedding because I couldn't bring my son or find a sitter? Update 1. After some time to reflect on everything that had happened, I decided to reach out to my sister. I wasn't ready to let this situation fester and completely ruin our relationship. I still loved her, and despite all the hurt feelings, I wanted to try and mend things. I knew that missing her wedding had caused a lot of damage, and even though I felt justified in my decision, I also recognized that this was a big moment in her life, and my absence likely stung more than I realized. So, I decided to call her. I rehearsed what I wanted to say in my head about a dozen times before picking up the phone. My plan was simple. I wanted to apologize for not being there, explain my position one more time, and let her know that I genuinely valued our relationship and hoped we could move forward. I didn't want to rehash the arguments or get into a blame game. I just wanted to clear the air. When she answered the phone, I could immediately sense the tension. Her tone was cold, and she clearly wasn't thrilled to hear from me. Still, I pushed forward, keeping my tone calm and steady. I started by apologizing again for missing her wedding and explaining how difficult the decision had been for me. I told her how much I had wanted to be there, how I'd done everything I could think of to make it work, and how heartbroken I was to miss such an important day in her life. I hoped that being vulnerable and sincere would help soften her stance, but the conversation didn't go the way I expected. At first, she just rehashed the same things she'd said before, that I should have figured it out, that other parents had managed to attend, and that my absence had been selfish and hurtful. I tried to remain patient, even as she repeated the same arguments that had already been thrown at me 100 times. But then, as the conversation escalated, she dropped a bombshell that completely floored me. Apparently, one of her bridesmaids, her best friend, had brought her 2-year-old to the wedding. My sister explained that her friend had run into a last-minute childcare issue, and because it was an emergency, my sister had made an exception and allowed the toddler to attend both the ceremony and the reception. She said it wasn't a big deal because it was a one-off situation, and she trusted her friend to handle it discreetly. My jaw practically hit the floor. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I had gone through, all the stress and heartache of trying to make arrangements, all the times I'd been told, no exceptions, and, it's not her responsibility, and now I was finding out that she had bent the rules for someone else. Someone who wasn't even family. I tried to process what she was saying, but the more I thought about it, the more betrayed I felt. I had spent weeks trying to find a solution, even suggesting compromises like hiring a sitter to stay in the hotel with my son, only to be told that it violated the spirit of her child-free wedding. And yet, when her friend couldn't find a babysitter, my sister had suddenly decided that exceptions were okay. I felt like I had been slapped in the face. I pointed out the glaring double standard and told her how hurt I was by her decision. I explained that it felt like she didn't value me or my son as much as she valued her friend and her friend's child. But instead of apologizing or even acknowledging my feelings, she doubled down. She said that her friend's situation was different and that I was being petty by bringing it up. She accused me of using this as ammunition to make her look bad, which couldn't have been further from the truth. I was just trying to understand how she could justify this when she had been so rigid with me. The conversation went downhill fast after that. No matter how I tried to explain my perspective, she refused to see my side. She was adamant that her decision had been reasonable and that I was blowing things out of proportion. When it became clear that we were just going in circles, I ended the call. I hung up feeling even more upset and frustrated than before. Over the next few days, I replayed the conversation in my head over and over again. I couldn't shake the sense of betrayal. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore, it was about what her actions said about how she saw me and my son. I understood that the wedding day was important to her and that she wanted everything to be perfect, but this felt personal. Allowing her friend to bring a child while refusing to extend the same grace to her own brother was a clear message, whether she realized it or not. It said that my struggles, my circumstances, and my relationship with her weren't as important as keeping her friend happy. Update 2. After learning that my sister had allowed her bridesmaid's child at the wedding, I couldn't stop thinking about the sheer hypocrisy of the situation. It gnawed at me, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I tried to bury it and move on, but every time my parents called to lecture me about how I had let my sister down, the anger and frustration bubbled back to the surface. Finally, during one of those calls, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I calmly but firmly told them about what I had learned, that my sister had made an exception to her no children rule for her best friend's toddler. I expected them to brush it off, like they had with everything else I'd brought up, but instead, they were silent. For a moment, I thought the call had disconnected. Then my mom finally spoke, and she sounded genuinely shocked. She had no idea this had happened. My dad, who had been stern and critical throughout this whole ordeal, was equally surprised. They both seemed taken aback, which was a small comfort to me. It meant that, at least on some level, they recognized how unfair this was. My mom assured me that she would talk to my sister about it. I wasn't sure what to expect from that conversation, but I appreciated that she was finally willing to address it. A part of me hoped that, once my sister realized how deeply her actions had hurt me, she might apologize or at least acknowledge that she had handled things poorly. Maybe this would be the turning point we needed to move forward. A few days later, my mom called me back. Her tone was different, quieter, more subdued. She told me that she had confronted my sister about the bridesmaid's child and that my sister had admitted it was true. At first, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe this would lead to some resolution. But then my mom dropped the rest of the story. Apparently, my sister didn't see anything wrong with what she had done. She had doubled down, insisting that her friend's situation had been a real emergency, and that it was completely different from mine. My mom tried to explain how unfair it looked, especially given how hard I had worked to find a solution, but my sister wasn't having it. Instead of apologizing, she shifted the blame back onto me. She told my mom that my absence wasn't just about the child-free rule, it was about me not making her feel important enough. She claimed that if I had really cared about her and her wedding, I would have moved mountains to be there, no matter what. Hearing that felt like a gut punch. I had spent weeks agonizing over this decision, losing sleep, and feeling torn between my responsibilities as a parent and my love for my sister. And yet, despite all of that, she was framing my absence as a personal slight, as though I had intentionally chosen not to prioritize her. It was so far from the truth that I didn't even know how to respond. I thanked my mom for telling me but told her I needed some time to process everything. Unfortunately, the surprises didn't stop there. A few days later, my dad called me. He told me that my sister had been venting to him about the situation and that during one of their conversations, she had casually mentioned that she regretted even inviting me to the wedding in the first place. According to her, inviting me had been a mistake because single parents always bring drama. Those were her exact words. My dad didn't seem to realize just how devastating it was to hear that, but for me, it felt like someone had ripped the floor out from under me. I've always been proud of how I've handled being a single dad. It hasn't been easy, but I've worked hard to build a stable, happy life for my son. To hear my sister reduce my entire life and struggles to bringing drama was heartbreaking. It wasn't just dismissive, it was cruel. I've always supported her, even when our lives were drastically different. I've been there for her during breakups, career changes, and countless other moments when she needed someone to lean on. And now, she was acting like my circumstances made me an embarrassment or a burden. My dad tried to mediate, saying that my sister was just emotional and didn't mean it, but the damage was already done. I couldn't unhear those words. They echoed in my mind every time I thought about her, making it impossible to imagine how our relationship could ever go back to what it was. In the days that followed, my parents found themselves caught in the middle. My mom, who had initially been so firmly on my sister's side, seemed to be wavering. She admitted that my sister's actions were unfair but also insisted that I needed to be the bigger person and let it go. My dad, meanwhile, kept trying to play both sides, telling me to apologize for missing the wedding while simultaneously telling my sister to cool it with the harsh comments. Their attempts to mediate only made things worse. Every time they called, I felt like I was being dragged back into the same exhausting cycle of blame and justification. At this point, I started to distance myself from the situation. I stopped answering every call from my parents and decided to take a step back from my sister entirely. I needed to focus on my son and my own well-being. The stress of this whole ordeal had been weighing on me heavily, and I couldn't keep pouring energy into a relationship that felt so one-sided. That decision wasn't easy. I've always valued family, and cutting ties with my sister, even temporarily, felt like admitting defeat. But I also realized that I couldn't keep prioritizing her feelings over my own or letting her dismiss my life and struggles as drama. If she wanted to repair our relationship, she would need to meet me halfway. Until then, I wasn't going to keep chasing after someone who clearly didn't value me the same way. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my sister. Maybe, with time, she'll come to see how unfair she was and reach out to make amends. Or maybe this will be the beginning of a long and painful rift in our family. For now, I'm focusing on what matters most, being the best dad I can be to my son and surrounding myself with people who truly value and support me. Update 3. About a month after the wedding drama, just as I was starting to regain a sense of normalcy, I found a letter in my mailbox from my sister. My first reaction was a mix of apprehension and curiosity. She hadn't spoken to me since our last heated conversation, so I had no idea what to expect. Was this a heartfelt apology? A continuation of her anger? Something in between? I stared at the envelope for a long time before finally opening it, unsure if I was ready to deal with whatever it contained. The letter began with what seemed like an attempt at an apology, or, at least, her version of one. She wrote that she had taken some time to reflect and realized that she might have been too rigid with her child-free wedding rule. She admitted that she hadn't been as understanding of my situation as she could have been and acknowledged that she should have considered the unique challenges of being a single parent. On the surface, it sounded like progress, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of hope that we could start moving toward reconciliation. But as I read on, that hope quickly dimmed. While she admitted to being too rigid, she also wrote that I had been overly sensitive and accused me of letting the situation spiral out of control. According to her, the drama surrounding my absence had overshadowed her wedding memories, and she implied that I bore responsibility for that. She didn't outright say I had ruined her day, but the subtext was clear. It stung, especially since I had gone to such lengths to avoid causing drama in the first place. All I had done was make a decision that prioritized my son's well-being, yet here I was, still being painted as the villain in her narrative. The final section of the letter was the part that truly left me at a loss. My sister wrote that she wanted to start mending our relationship and invited me to a small family gathering she was hosting with her husband. The purpose of the gathering, she explained, was to open wedding gifts in an intimate setting with close family members. My parents had already told me about this event, and they were ecstatic when they heard that my sister had invited me. They saw it as an olive branch, a chance for us to begin repairing the damage. But there was a catch. While she said my son was welcome to attend, she added a condition: he would need to stay in a separate room with supervision during the gathering. She justified this by saying that it was important for the focus to stay on the couple, and that having a child present could be distracting. Reading that line, I felt a familiar wave of frustration and disappointment wash over me. Once again, my sister was framing my son as an inconvenience, as though his mere presence would detract from her event. It felt like a continuation of the same dismissive attitude that had started all this in the first place. I spent the next few days grappling with what to do. On one hand, I genuinely wanted to mend things with my sister. She's family, and despite everything, I missed the bond we used to have. I knew my parents were desperate for us to reconcile and were putting a lot of hope into this gathering as a turning point. But on the other hand, the idea of isolating my son yet again didn't sit right with me. It felt like sending a message that his feelings didn't matter, that he was somehow less than, in the eyes of our family. And I couldn't shake the fact that my sister's so-called apology had been laced with blame and conditions. I decided to talk to my son about it. He's only 6, but I've always believed in being honest with him in an age-appropriate way. I explained the situation as simply as I could and asked how he felt about going. His response was immediate: he said he'd rather stay home and watch movies with me. He didn't say it with any sadness or resentment, he just seemed genuinely uninterested in attending. And honestly, that made my decision easier. I realized that I wasn't just thinking about my sister's actions anymore, I was thinking about the kind of example I wanted to set for my son. So I declined the invitation. I wrote my sister a brief but polite note thanking her for the gesture but explaining that I didn't feel comfortable with the conditions she had attached to my son's attendance. I told her that I was open to having a conversation about rebuilding our relationship in the future but that I couldn't accept an invitation that made my son feel excluded or unwelcome. I kept it respectful but firm, and I mailed it off without overthinking it. When my parents found out, they were disappointed, though not entirely surprised. My mom called me and tried to convince me to reconsider, saying that the event was a perfect opportunity to smooth things over, and that I should just let the past be the past. My dad chimed in with his usual refrain about being the bigger person. But I stood my ground. I told them that I wasn't willing to teach my son that we had to accept being treated like second-class citizens just to keep the peace. The gathering came and went, and as expected, my absence became another point of contention. My sister apparently made a big show of telling everyone that she had extended an olive branch, and that I had chosen to reject it. My parents relayed this to me with an exasperated tone, as though I was the unreasonable one. But I felt no regrets. For the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt like I had done what was truly right for both myself and my son. In the weeks that followed, I began to see the situation more clearly. My sister's apology, while appreciated, had come with strings attached. Her invitation, though seemingly generous, was yet another attempt to control the narrative and the dynamics of our relationship. It wasn't about reconciliation, it was about maintaining her sense of superiority while offering me a way to grovel back into her good graces. And that wasn't something I could accept. At this point, I've decided to focus on the relationships that truly matter, my son, my friends, and the family members who treat us with the respect and kindness we deserve. If my sister ever decides to genuinely address the hurt she's caused and approach me with a sincere desire to rebuild our relationship, I'll be open to that. But until then, I'm done bending over backward to accommodate someone who sees my life as an inconvenience.